All right, welcome once again to Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight on your brain, hopefully make some complex things a little more understandable. And since it's summertime, maybe that white lightning will be blackberry flavored today. Um, Probably not, because we're going to get into some more complicated things today, talking about COVID and its portrayal in the media a lot. And this is something it was really frustrating when I started doing my part looking into it. It made me realize, I knew things were bad, but I've kind of unplugged. So practically the only time I go online anymore is to play Vermintide with my friends. Look that game up. It's fun. Anyway, I didn't realize how bad things had gotten. So Sam is going to talk about an MIT study and some CDC numbers. And I was looking at it from the political side because, as I've said, chemistry is witchcraft because I don't understand it. So it's not real science to me. So I was looking at the political side, and there's this dump of 2,000 or so emails from Dr. Fauci that were released under a Freedom of Information Act request. And I was looking for the actual emails. I couldn't find them. It took me a while because page after page, just doing a basic Google search was just one-sided articles talking about the emails.
Mhm.
And so we've reached a point where I'm going to have to be careful now not to say, look, this information is out there, go look it up, because it might not be out there. You might not be able, or it might be out there, but does it matter if you can't find it? Then it's not really out there, is it?
Well, I made the comment, I think it was even in our first episode, that the only thing we have going for us right now in the current political environment is, the only two things going is that some of the states are standing up for their own states' rights, and the other part is freedom of information. And when we go into that MIT article, we start seeing how dangerous this is because
Mhm.
they actually argue for the public not having access to information. And so that's where the big danger lies.
And uh if you're kind of our age or younger, that probably seems hard to grasp because we're not millennials or Z, which has their whole life has been internet based. So the internet was really starting to get going as we were finishing high school and going into college. So all of our adult lives, we've lived with this, not only this free flow of information, but this expanding free flow of information, right? However, it shouldn't be too hard to imagine that valve can be siphoned off pretty easily because it's happening.
Mhm.
There's long been this idea in more libertarian circles that uh, the world is going to have to become more and more free, even more and more libertarian as technology advances, because historically, advances in technology has made it harder for governments to crack down, to be more
Mhm.
authoritarian. The advances in technology have let us be more free. Well, there's a disturbing trend in China where that's the inverse.
Mhm.
The more technology advances, the more they can monitor and control their population through the flow of information. So it can absolutely happen here. And just my brief example this morning of, okay, I know this thing exists. Why can't I find it?
Mhm.
And even, just clicking on some of those obviously biased links and looking at those articles and thinking, okay, well, surely they'll have the raw data in here or a link to it somewhere. No, no. So it's getting to the point now where um, I would say the primary thing you need to look for if you're looking for sources of information is people who cite their sources. So
Mhm.
whatever they're saying, whatever they're based on, they need to cite their sources, tell you where it's coming from, and ideally have a link to it so you can look at it for yourself.
Well, unfortunately, it gets more complicated than that, Heath, because CDC cited their sources and the stuff I'm going to go over with COVID numbers, and you go to the sources and the numbers don't match. So they did some funny math in there to match the numbers, and it was very frustrating because I dug through everything just so I could match their numbers to prove my point, and it just never added up. No matter how I broke up their data, it never added up. And age adjusted mortality rates is not a difficult calculation. It's just the census data they cited for population broken down by age did not have the same age brackets as the mortality data they cited for certain mortality instances by age. So realistically, the closest I could get was breaking it down from 17 and under, 18 to 64, and 65 and up. Because
let's go ahead and jump into that, because if we don't have time for the political stuff, that's not as important, I think, as
it's all tied together. It's going to come.
Yeah.
It's going to come right together. And the main thing here is with the freedom of information is that people like myself who know how to calculate these things should be able to go in there and check their math, because we can't just blindly say, oh, CDC said this, so they must be right. Now, if you're not very good at statistics or any of that, then you're going to have to trust some people, but there has to be a body of the population that can go in there randomly just because they're curious and check their work. And when I did, it didn't add up. And there's two big problems with the way they did it, because it is political. Because we've learned over the last year that all the government has to do is call something a health threat, and everybody's going to follow along. And this one covers two bases. First of all, it's the COVID numbers themselves, and the second one is on the racial line, because one of the power tools that they're using is COVID disproportionately affects XYZ groups. And there's a little bit of that, but it's not nearly as extreme as their publication shows. Let me just bring up.
While you're pulling that up, another, well, that couldn't happen here, analogy that you made me think of is the public health part of it. Is that's how prohibition was sold. And we kind of look back at prohibition now and kind of roll our eyes and laugh and think, how could that even happen? Well, it was sold as a public health crisis. Alcoholism was a public health crisis, and the prohibition movement was able to whip enough people into a frenzy to get prohibition passed, even though most people, oh, well, I don't have a problem. If I have a nip every now and then, it's not a big deal. But yeah, it's a public health crisis. And look where that got us.
The chart I brought up is the mortality data for 2020. And these are estimates. Of course, they have to say that in there because we're like we talked about in previous episodes. It's about 2 years behind because it takes a long time for these things to be finalized. So there is some estimation going on, but usually it's pretty accurate. And the first number here is the total deaths that I highlighted, and the second one is an age-adjusted number. So there is a specific calculation where they take a breakdown of the different ages of the population, and then there's a modifier you put in based on what percentage of each age group makes up the population. And that's a good calculation to compare the total deaths from year to year, or the deaths from heart disease from year to year from the same population. So US population 2017 versus 2018 versus 2019 versus 2020, you look at that age adjusted and it washes out the fact that maybe we're a little older this year or more kids were born another year, because that's going to change the number. So it's a good one to go by, because if that stays pretty steady, then there's not a whole lot to worry about.
Right. But if you look at 2020 deaths and say 3.3 million, oh my gosh, in 1900 it was, okay, well, what was the population in 1900? Because right now, what was the census data, like 330 million, something like that?
Yeah, approximately 330 million. I have to bring that one up, but I think they show the estimate in this article somewhere, but it's not important right now because it's just that's a good calculation for that measurement. So you're taking the exact same population year after year after year after year and comparing them. Now, what they did with that exact same calculation is they, on the bottom here, used it to compare different groups. And now we're entering a different field. So if you take Black non-Hispanic, white non-Hispanic, Asian non-Hispanic, and you compare those two using that same number, it skews the data. And it skews it in a way that makes it really look, again, the term they use, disproportionate. And if you slide to the right there, it's the COVID numbers. And you compare white non-Hispanic, age adjusted, 72.5 per 100,000 population, and Hispanic, which was the hardest hit according to their calculations, 164. It's more than double. But if you really take the total numbers and you compare it to population, you take a crude rate, it's pretty proportional to population. And why is that? Why is this number not a great calculation for comparing two groups? Because if I know the average populations of broken down by age, I can tell you which group I want to use to push forward an agenda. So white people are disproportionately older than Hispanic and Black non-Hispanic, to the extent that it's almost a 2-to-1 ratio. And if I know that ahead of time, then I know I can get a good number that says it basically doubles. If you're comparing two groups, it doubles the deaths of the smaller population. Does that make sense?
No, you're going to have to explain that to dumb people. I have a thick candy shell around my brain.
Okay,
so because I don't know. So the first thing that jumps out at me for someone who has a thick candy shell and hasn't been looking at this stuff like you have is I don't know what these numbers mean. So I mean, obviously 3,358,000 blah blah. Okay, that's total deaths, fine. But what does that age adjusted number mean? 828.7 what?
828.7 deaths per 100,000 people.
Per 100,000. And okay, so 828.7 deaths per 100,000 people, age adjusted.
Yes, age adjusted.
Okay.
And so now when you get down to the groups, so just take total deaths, we look at the age adjusted just for Black non-Hispanic is 1,105, right? Approximately. So you would look at those two numbers. Okay, if total for the population is 828, but Blacks are 1,100. Well, oh my, they're disproportionately affected by death, period, right? So now we look at the COVID number, 91.5. That's the total population. That's the baseline, right? So then you go down and look at Black non-Hispanic, 151. Ooh, they're almost twice as affected. And when you look at those two numbers just without thinking too deeply into it, you're like, oh, they must have been affected more. It's obvious, to the tune of twice as much. Same for Hispanic. And white people are less. Look, 72 versus the 91. So obviously they had an advantage, must be systemic racism. But the way it's calculated, are you seeing, do you still have the article up, or are you seeing my?
Nope, I still have that first article up. It didn't
Okay,
switch over to the calculation. Oh, I finally see now at the bottom where they're breaking down what the things mean. So while you're pulling that up, I mean, you just, it must be systemic racism. Well, yeah, if you've determined ahead of time that that's the reason for everything, then that's the reason for everything. It's called confirmation bias, and it's highly prevalent.
And where they say statistics can mean anything. Well, if you know ahead of time what conclusion you want, I can know ahead of time what calculation I want to use. Let me reshare. All right. You got a spreadsheet up now?
It's loading. There we go. Spreadsheet.
Okay. So again, I had to break it down a lot of different ways, because here's the regular mortality rates, but they were broken up differently on the
And you took
population
this
data.
straight off the CDC's website, right?
This is off the NIH and CD. This was their source, the NIH website with all the data. So that's where I got it. It's my own spreadsheet, but that's where I did get the data from. And it's the one that's sourced at the bottom of the article I just shared from you.
Right.
But basically, what do I got? White here, 65 and above was 41,000. I'm highlighting one of the numbers here. 41,156. Well, 41 million is the white population over 65 plus. So that's total population census data.
Okay.
Okay, so that's approximately 23-ish% of the total white population. And we go over to the black population, 4 million or almost 5 million, but it's only about 13% of the black population. So only 13% of the black population is over 65, whereas 23% of the white population is over 65. So when you do an age-adjusted calculation, that modifier at the end that I just highlighted is based on the percentage of population. So that 4 million divided by the total US population creates that modifier. Whereas that 41 million divided by the total population creates that modifier. And so when you do an age adjusted across populations, you get the same modifier because it's based on the total US population. And so now, because of that, every white death is counted as 1, every black death is counted as 2. So you get to double up your total. That's why it doesn't work across populations if you break them down after the fact. Does that make sense?
Because what they're doing is using the total population modifier and then using that within a subset group. And what they need to be doing is redoing their modifier for that group.
Exactly.
So
it's not, it's the wrong tool for the job is the point.
Yes. And it's a good way to monkey around with the numbers if that's your goal. And it sure seems like that was their goal.
Same population over time. It's a great tool.
Yes.
Different populations within the same place in any given point in time. It's a horrible tool because if I have a disease that disproportionately kills old people and I have a population that is disproportionately young, I know I'm going to double up on that number. And they knew that ahead of time. Of course, they probably
because that's what the age adjustment is intended to do, is so that you can say, well, okay, we're comparing 1950 to 2000. Well, 1950 or probably a little after that, 50 to 55, whatever that was the baby boom. So if you're comparing, if you even if you want to compare something specific like infant mortality, you can't just look at the raw numbers of 1950 and 2000 because way more babies were born in the baby boom. So your raw number might be way higher.
Now, what you could do is you could break down those age brackets and you can compare white over 65 to black over 65 to Hispanic over 65, but you got to stay in those ranges if you want to do that. So that would be a better use of it, but they didn't do that because they knew it would give a different number because we got a little over 200,000 compared to just over 40,000, which is about a 5 times difference, which is exactly the difference in population for black versus white.
Right.
So,
and again,
it's actually quite proportional at that point.
So what they should have done, if they were being honest about their numbers, is, all right, so here's our total numbers. Here's our total age adjusted rate, which we get by using the formula that they use.
And then switch to crude rates when it came to comparing populations within the population.
Or redo their math when they went to the subset. So if you want to compare ethnic groups, okay, well, then you need to redo your age adjusted just for that group. You can't go and use the same number for the total population because you're not talking total population anymore. You're talking the Black population, which is different.
And the key here is, we'll get back to politics, is they're creating policy based on this. So when we talk about, here's a great one, when we were talking about who gets the vaccine first, elderly or frontline workers. The argument for frontline workers was Black people are disproportionately frontline workers, and or not frontline workers, essential workers. Frontline was first no matter what. But essential versus old people, and white people are disproportionately old. Well, we've got a disease that kills disproportionately old people. The whole race issue should have been a non-issue, because it should have stopped right there. You saw those numbers that I just had up, how great the difference was between under 17. It was in double digits. And then 18 to 64 was in the single thousands on both populations. And then 65 and up was hundreds of thousands. So
yeah, we're looking at the raw COVID numbers right here. We're looking at those again, and you can just see, that exponential curve as you go up in age group. It shouldn't matter what your race is. This is one of those. It really doesn't discriminate. If you're older, no matter what your race is, you're in a significantly higher danger group.
Well, it's 65 and up white Americans accounted for 205,000 deaths out of the total 377. That's pretty proportional to the white population, but it is very disproportional compared to the older white population. So it should have been a no-brainer right there. Give it to old people.
Yes.
But because they wanted to politicize it and make it about race, because they're also attaching that to environmental issues, to infrastructure issues, to everything else, then they use this, again, the wrong tool for the job, just to create their point. And I think that's a good segue to the MIT article, because that's specifically what they talk about. Same data set, two different conclusions. One they're calling far right, and the other is their agenda. Does that make sense? Same data, different conclusion. And here I had the same data, and if I used a crude analysis, it would have been relatively proportional to population. But because we use it age adjusted, it pushed their agenda forward. So we've got this article from MIT. Let me go to it did switch, right?
Yeah.
Viral visualization, how coronavirus skeptics use orthodox data practices to promote unorthodox science online. And as we go through this, they admit it's an ethnography, which for those that don't know what that is, it's more of it's just, I'm trying to pick my words carefully. They're presenting it as a scientific article, but an ethnography is more of a social commentary. And it's not even a sociology social commentary, it's in social sciences social commentary. So what this article basically goes over is how statisticians like myself and a lot of people online are using the same data sets, because of freedom of information, to come up with counter visualizations to the CDC and the NIH and the government as a whole with the COVID data. And as we just saw, they presented a paper that gave their numbers, and I presented crude numbers for you that had completely different conclusions, and you would create completely different policy based on that. Right. Do you want to add to that real quick?
Not yet, because I'm still digesting the MIT study here as we look at it. Well, I will say that, okay, what they're doing here is basically advocating for the advocating for banning disagreement, really, because that's the point of those viral visualizations that they're denouncing and think are so terrible. Well, hold on. If you're not a numbers person, which a lot of people aren't, and if you're more of a visual person, which a lot of people are, that's why visualizing data is so important. That's why graphs are so useful, and that's why it's very important to craft your visualization in a way that accurately portrays your numbers, because the whole point of these numbers, especially in this instance where we're talking about informing the public so that they can make uh, rational health decisions, but then also informing policymakers so that they can craft policy. You've got to be able to show them what your numbers actually mean, what they actually say, in a way that can be digested. So if exactly. So
well, for those in the audience, that this is way before we started the podcast. Is I shared this on Facebook maybe 2 weeks after the George Floyd incident, because all these numbers were coming out and everything was so horrible in the media. And I looked up the actual numbers and I did all the calculations, and I was like, that's the exact opposite.
Yeah.
Same data set, but it was the way the data was being presented. It was one calculation to show this, say a relative number. So per population, Black people are more arrested than white, et cetera, all these things. But then the other side was doing the exact opposite. They were using the extreme, crude, non-relative, no other variables accounted for, because it created a counter argument that was just as fallacious, but in the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did have a lot of misinformation going back and forth from right, left, right, left, right, left. And we do need to account for that. But at the same time, it needs to be done differently. And what we have with the MIT article
Bring that back up. What was that? What was that title? Because that annoys me.
It's a very fancy way of saying they're using the same data to mislead you.
But yeah, so hold on a second here. First of all, coronavirus skeptics. Okay, right off the bat, that made me twitch my head a little bit, and my thick candy shell was trying to crack. That's why I was having trouble thinking of something to respond. That right off the bat made me go, hold on a second, because what you're doing there is you're doing this rhetorical sleight of hand. Because coronavirus skeptic, oh, you mean conspiracy theorist nuts? No, hold on. A skeptic is just someone who isn't sure or who disagrees with you. And
well, and notice the way they worded it, coronavirus skeptic, as in, so now they can lump you in with the group that says coronavirus itself was a hoax, which we all know is ridiculous too. Again, ridiculous on the other side. And this, again, going on both sides. So we, to knock the right here, I hated all the podcasters and presenters and memes and everything that were like, a disease that was 99.99% not deadly is, and it was okay. If you take total deaths, divide it by the population of the United States, okay, you get that number. But you got to take the deaths divided by the people who got it. Now you see how deadly it is. Wasn't as advertised on the left, but it was also much more. It was about 5% versus
it wasn't that some of the early mass hysteria about it made it seem like it was freaking Ebola. Okay, well, it's not that, but it also isn't just the common flu. It's flu-like, and I've always said you can think of it as a really bad flu, but then I'm gonna look at it from a historical perspective. So when I say really bad flu, I mean like the Spanish flu of 1918.
So was it 2 million people died or something?
It was a lot worldwide. I want to say that estimates were that something like a fifth of the world population. It was like a modern day bubonic plague. That's how bad it was. Because when you look at the multiple waves, there were like 3 or 4 waves of the Spanish flu. So that's how bad it was. And I don't think the coronavirus numbers are even close to that yet, but it's still bad. It's still enough that we need to take it seriously. But then, okay, how do we take it seriously? What's the most rational approach? And that's the other thing about this title that annoys me, is unorthodox.
Mm-hmm.
Well, hold on a second. A lot of science is unorthodox until it's not.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the point of it.
Well, and it's the nature of the argument. And I think my biggest point here is the way this should work is they should present theirs. The counter movement should present their data, and then a debate starts over which one is more accurate. And to go into this paper, and I really recommend people who understand how to read scientific papers, or even if you don't, this is a good one to practice on, is they admit in this paper that the unorthodox visualizations are more accurate than what they're calling the orthodox visualizations. But because, as we go down to 2.2 here, they don't account for social justice, they are the wrong ones. So even though they're more accurate, because they don't account for these other agendas, they are the wrong ones to use. And so they have a whole section here that says, because we're accounting for taking things from what they call a critical stance, which we've talked about before, from the social justice, the postmodern literature, theirs is better. And so that's where the debate should go. They say theirs is better because they're accounting for that, whereas the other side should be like, no, ours is better because it's more accurate. And then someone needs to come in and say, well, you're both kind of wrong. It should be here. And then that debate starts. And the public should be privy to all that. And the other big thing about this paper, and I can't remember exactly where it is in the paper, but they argue in this paper that because people are making these counter arguments, which what they call mislead the public, even though they're more accurate, that we probably shouldn't have the information available to the public. And that is the danger zone.
Yeah. Because what you say misleading. Hold on, no, we're disagreeing. We have a different approach. Okay, you say that we should respond to this epidemic this way. We say you should respond to it this way. That there should be a back and forth there. I was listening to a guy. There's a political commentator, radio guy named Steve Deese. And he's got a new book out called Fauci and Bargain, which is a great pun on Fauci's name. And he made the point that, and I think this is a very cogent political point, that where he thinks the argument was lost was and I'd forgotten that this happened. Remember, we at the very beginning we had 15 days to flatten the curve. Okay, well then after that, it kept going, and it was 30 days to slow the spread. And he thinks that's where it was lost, is that when we did 30 days to slow the spread, well, then we just allowed the creep to happen, and so it just kept going and going and going. And he said what should have happened, and not only is this sound politics, but this is sound science too, is that what should have happened during that 15 days to flatten the curve, President Trump should have put Fauci as the director of the NIAID and kind of the lead spokesperson, figurehead, whatever on this. He should have put him in a room with a bunch of other scientists from similar fields, but who maybe disagreed. I can't remember all their names, but he rattled off some names, some guys from Stanford, some guys from Harvard. I think we've cited a few here. Put them in a room and have it live online and just let them debate. No moderators, no politicians, no policy guys in there during that time. Just, okay, here are our epidemiologists and other experts in this field.
It should have been epidemiologists, there should have been virologists, there should have been economists, there should have been evolutionary biologists. Across fields should have been in there. No, this is how this works. Well, this
Yes,
is experience from the past. Oh, this is how it will affect the economy. This is the death rate that might result from that.
exactly. What do we know about this virus? How should we respond? What are the pluses and minuses of those responses?
And we
You
should have been
know,
able to watch it on C-SPAN.
debate back and forth, sitting in a room, and 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 go at it. And instead, what we had a political narrative from on high, from again from both sides, because you had Trump making his pronouncements here, you had Fauci making his pronouncements here, and then the media would tell you, no, depending on which media you watched, is you know he's full of crap and he said this, and the he again depends on which media you watched. So we never had that uh free flow of information available to the public.
But
And
there's a certain side of the aisle that thought we did because they just ate up what was given to them. And anything else is misinformation.
exactly, it's why this mantra of trust the science annoys me, because first of all, trust but verify, as Reagan said. But that's the basic scientific principle is, okay, I trust you because I know that you're uh I can trust you, Sam, because I know your reputation when it comes to these things. But it doesn't mean I'm just taking your word for it. I mean, just now you're saying, okay, well, here are these numbers. Okay, well, how did they get those numbers? How did you get your numbers? What does this mean? Okay, you need to do that. And these people who are saying trust the scientist or trust the science, no, what you mean is trust the scientist, or small group of scientists who I agree with, or who are saying what I want, supporting the policies that I want. That's not trusting the science. That's trusting people. That's
Well,
trusting individuals or small groups who agree with you.
there's this movement now online to, oh, look, all these uh, people talking about lab leak hypothesis. They're vindicated now. I'm like, no, we're not. How many thousands of people died because we didn't explore this option a year ago? And I still have all the censored posts. That are they just going to all of a sudden release all the posts I still have that are censored? No, they still have their warning on them. They still have everything that says I'm misinformation, but we were talking about it a year ago. And what people don't understand, how important this is, and why, back to the Fauci emails, there's nothing damning in there except the fact that he lied under oath to the Senate floor. And that lie, we can't even calculate the impact of that lie. But if you take what people don't understand is the importance of it. If you take a gain of function virus versus a wild type virus, which is what he called it, you're gonna have a different response to the pandemic because they're going to adapt differently in the wild. And the gain of function is going to have a big giant head start to all these variants, which we're now worried about. And an adapted virus in a lab will adapt to be worse as time goes, where a wild type tends to get better as time goes. And we're seeing the opposite. So we would have responded completely different a year ago. And how many thousands of lives would have been saved? We can't even calculate that. We don't know. You definitely wouldn't have been introducing a vaccine right in the middle of it because it's going to adapt differently. We perpetuated the gain of function research if it indeed was in a lab, which we can't say for sure because it's still a hypothesis. I hate when people call it a theory. Theory has a little bit more rigor behind it, but if it was, then we did the wrong thing. And that's a big deal because it's going to impact us later too, because a shit ton of people are vaccinated right now.
So,
and don't call me an anti-vaxxer. I have all my regular vaccines. I will not get polio. Again, that's that tribal thing. They call you an anti-vaxxer now because they lump you in that group of hippies that wouldn't get regular vaccines too.
So. No, I have a problem with this vaccine for these reasons.
Well, and it just, again, all I want is an explanation of why because I've had COVID before, why a vaccine will help me more than having the actual virus, because every other virus in the history of history, it's the opposite. A lot of vaccines we take is because it's too damning to actually get the virus. Whereas someone who's actually been through the virus, you got to explain to me. You got to at least come out.
Yes.
And now that everything is going, the misinformation trail on the government side with Fauci and the leaked emails, it actually it vindicates the people who want that explanation. That's the only
Yes.
vindication
What
there.
it vindicates is the free flow of information, and that you shouldn't rely on just one person or one small group when you're talking about complicated issues and the policy response to that. And here's oh, you got to enable screen sharing for me to
My bad.
yeah,
There you go.
to look at where's that one share. Okay, so this was the one I'm digging through here, and that's why I didn't want to get too deep into the Fauci emails, because you see down on the bottom here, there's 3,234 pages of this stuff, and I'm on page 21. So I've listened to some people, and I've read some articles talking about and that have actually cited these emails, but I wanted to go through them myself. And something I hadn't seen someone talk about that jumped up at me, and you just brought it up, is one of Fauci's rather infamous dust-ups with Senator Rand Paul was when Senator Paul was saying, look, we've got all these people that have already had it and recovered. And this was months ago. I want to say this was like last summer, where he said, why aren't we telling those people to go back to life as normal? And Fauci said, you don't know what you're talking about. Blah, blah, blah. Well, wait a minute. You've got in an email from March of 2020, he's saying you would assume that there would be substantial immunity post-infection. Well, why didn't you say that?
Well, and the numbers back that up too, at the point where he was talking to Rand Paul.
And why didn't in public? Why didn't he say what he's saying in private here in this email? So, yeah, the MD PhD guy here, his question was, is a person likely to be immune once they caught the coronavirus? Do we know anything about likely drift? Which is what you were talking about with the mutations of natural versus gain of function. No evidence in this regard, but you would assume. Okay, well, he could have been nuanced in his answer. He didn't have to be so rigid, especially when he knew that when he knew as a supposed expert in this field, and he's telling others it is an RNA virus, and so you can expect mutations, but not sure how much is going on. We'll have to check. Why didn't he just say that? Well, we don't know for sure because it's an RNA virus, so we can expect mutations, but blah, blah, blah. He was very combative, very arrogant. And this is where, so my one takeaway so far from going through these emails is, and where, once again, nobody likes us and we disagree with everybody. What I found when I was trying to find the emails is from the people you would expect, from the usual subjects, everything was about how Fauci is still a saint, and he's still a great person, and he's still the expert. And then on the other side, it's Fauci's a liar. He's been completely discredited. Okay, he hasn't been completely discredited. That's as silly as some of the articles I found were fact checks saying, well, this is these attacks from the right are mostly untrue. And their reasoning for that was because some of the idiot bloggers and commentators are referring to this as Fauci's leaked emails. Well, they weren't leaked. They were issued
acquired,
under a Freedom of Information Act so they were required to be given after being redacted because he's a public official. Okay, well, so people are dumb when they say that it's leaked, but that doesn't mean that their criticisms are necessarily invalid. They're just lazy.
Well, and
or
a
they're
lot
clickbait.
of, yeah, lazy labeling, like a man-made virus. It's not a man-made virus. It's a bat coronavirus that was adapted in a lab, possibly,
Mhm.
if things play out with the hypothesis, that was adapted to human tissue.
Yeah. So hold that thought. Let me finish my
Okay.
comment on Fauci here. The reason I say that no one's going to like me because I disagree with everyone is my takeaway from this is that I actually kind of feel sorry for Dr. Fauci. And I think that when you look at these emails from March and April of 2020, just as this thing was getting started, um, I think you see a very good real life example of power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely.
When he got caught in a
Because
tidal wave too.
yeah.
Yeah.
So early on, he actually seems like a really nice guy. I mean, he's getting emailed because he's a public official. He's getting thousands of emails, daily, and he responds personally to a lot of them, including just normal people saying, "Hey, I called the CDC and I couldn't get an answer on this. Can you tell me blah blah blah?" And he responds, and he's very, he's very nice and polite about it. So he seems like a nice guy, and then he gets in front of a camera and a microphone, especially as it goes on, and he's getting more and more praise, and he becomes more and more belligerent, more and more arrogant, and more rigid, which again you don't see in these early emails when he's talking not just to other professionals who have questions and comments on the virus, but other people, saying so. Some of these emails were about the pneumonia vaccine, and and he says, well, that might help in these cases because one of the major complications to coronavirus is when it's combined with pneumonia because it's a respiratory infection.
Mm-hmm.
So you get that compromised system, and then you're more susceptible to either viral or bacterial pneumonia, and that's really what ends up killing you in the same way that what kills a lot of people who have AIDS is pneumonia. Anyway, so he's being more nuanced there. He's saying, yeah, you should get the pneumonia, especially if you're an older person. You should get the pneumonia vaccine anyway because it will protect you from viral pneumonia, but it won't protect you from bacterial pneumonia, et cetera, and so forth. So
Well, and just being in bed rest will make you
yeah,
susceptible. I mean, I've had pneumonia because I had to lay flat on my back for 2 days after one of my heart surgeries.
yeah.
So, yeah,
So he's just a different person, and I really think it's because he got that celebrity status, and that corrupts you.
he's also in a grinding wheel of a political movement too.
Yes.
Because again, going back to that CDC data, there is a specific agenda there, and they're using every bit of it, whether it's the racial, the environmental, or even the lockdown issue, the economic issue. There is that one machine grinding forward with that, and it will eat you.
Yeah.
If you're a political
now,
figure right now.
Finish your thought on gain finders, because I think this is important. That people understand, because I'm afraid that when you talk about man-made or made in a lab virus, people have this weird, science fiction movie image of I'm taking molecules and I'm putting them together to create a super virus. That's not how this works.
Yeah, no, it's definitely not how it works. So when you have an animal virus, everything in life is probabilities. Whether you're playing the lotto, getting struck by lightning, whatever, everything's a probability. Getting in a car accident, you don't know if you're going to be driving and that person's going to have a blowout next to you, right? Everything is a probability, and we try to minimize our risks every day. With a virus going from an animal to an animal, there's a probability there. It going from an animal to a human is a very small chance, but there is a chance. No matter what the virus is, no matter what the animal is, no matter what the human is, you could get that one that hits your cell and adapts. So it's a lightning strike to go from animal to human. But at that same point, it's another lightning strike for that to be a viable virus to go from human to human. So that's one of the big arguments for the lab leak hypothesis is you would have had to have that lightning strike when the guy, quote unquote, ate the bat, then go to another lightning strike where he was actually able to infect somebody because it was viable in his system to such a degree that he could shed enough virus to infect somebody else before he even died too. So there's another part of that. So
yeah, and again, he says quote unquote because we know that's not what happened, but that's what was reported early on, is that came from a wet market. And also remember, early on, China was saying, and the WHO was backing them up, is there's no evidence of human to human transmission. They kept repeating it and kept repeating it, and to the extent where I don't know how many people know this, but there were some Chinese scientists that just disappeared. One of the early guys that sounded the alarm. There were other Chinese scientists that had to flee the country and are still in exile because they were contradicting what the CCP was saying at the time, which was there's no human to human transmission, because that's usually how it works in an animal virus.
So what you're doing in the lab is basically you're bombarding these tissues, so those probabilities are more likely to happen. It's like buying every number combination in the lottery. You guarantee you're going to win at some point. So they're bombarding these tissues with this virus so until it adapts, and then they do it again until it's viable to adapt again, and then again and again and again until it's
because they need to see how this virus is going to affect human tissue so that they can be ahead of the game if that double lightning strike does happen, which it can happen. As you say,
yeah,
it's a low probability, but it is a probability. Remember, this virus's full name is SARS-2.
Yeah.
So it's happened once before with SARS-1. We know this can happen, and that bats especially are just a hotbed of nasty viruses that have jumped to humans before.
I think this concept is good talking about COVID in general, because the message in the beginning, remember those memes with just the virus floating through the air and everybody was going to die, stay inside. People have this idea that one viral particle getting in your lung and you're done, where it's density dependent, which means you have to be bombarded with it to the extent that your immune system can't handle it. So again, we're talking about lightning strikes. That virus, that viral particle, that RNA strand has to get into your system, attached to a cell. So there's two probabilities there. First of all, you breathed it in. There's one. Second of all, it attached to a cell. Third, it has to replicate and make a viable cell that lives long enough to replicate again and again and again and again and again after that for you to get sick. And so we're talking billions of viral particles getting into your system for you even to be infected. So just walking near somebody like they're a sack of virus was the wrong message from the beginning, because we do have an immune system. We have natural killer cells that will take care of things if we get a minute load. So something like passing somebody on the street is probably not going to get you infected. Being outside because the air dissipates the viral load was always never a problem, unless you're right in somebody's face. When they were talking about, oh, a vaccinated person can spread it, that's a true statement. They can spread it, but it's again, playing the lotto. You're not going to win usually. So he's talking about it replicating in your nasal cavities and everything. I'm like, well, what are we going to be doing? Shooting snot rockets up each other's nose? Because you do need that density to do it. So yes, it can happen. It was a true statement, but it's not bloody likely.
Yeah. I had a thought and I've completely forgotten what it was. Oh, I remember. So my analogy on how this is supposed to work, that I thought of when we were talking about this before we got going. I watched a good documentary on Netflix about black holes because I'm a nerd, and I've always loved math and physics. And so there was this. It's called, I think the full title is like Black Holes: The Edge of What We Know, and it was following this group. You may remember, if you're a nerd like me, that back in, I think it was 2018 when it was released, that we took the first picture, and I'll explain why I'm using air quotes here. We took the first picture of a black hole. Okay. Well, how they did that was they used, I think it was like 8 or 10 different observatories around the world to all focus on this one point where they knew from surrounding astronomy that there was a black hole here. So they had all of these observatories focus in on this one point at the same time so that you could essentially make a telescope the size of the world, because that's what it takes to look that far and take a picture that detailed. Okay. Well, so in order to make sure, because the way you have to make the picture essentially is to synthesize that data. Well, so in order to make sure that what their synthesis, what their algorithm that creates the picture from this data shows is actually what it is, they had something like 200 different scientists were part of this this group that was taking a picture of this black hole. And so the press conference and the picture release was in 2018. The actual data was collected in 2016. So 2 years of these 200 scientists going through all this data, discussing and debating with each other, and then ultimately when it came time to create the image from the data, they split up into, I think it was 4 different teams that were using their own algorithms to come up with this picture, and they were not allowed to talk to each other at all. They couldn't look at each other's data. They couldn't talk to each other at all, because they knew that, okay, if we come together and all 4 teams are showing the same thing, then we've done it right. Okay, because that's how it's supposed to work. Is all of these different ideas and perspectives all coming together until we all have the same conclusion. We all say X equals 1.
Mm-hmm.
That's how it's supposed to work, and that's why the free flow of information is so important. And as you say, oh well, we're vindicated now. Well, no, we're not with these emails, because those people are still discredited to the other side, or to the people in the middle who don't know what to think. They still have those warnings on their social media posts about how this contains, disputed information, or linking you to some factcheck.org or whatever.
Well, not only that, but the damage is done when it comes to division. Because again, you had the same data set and you had 2 separate messages that were very wrong in both directions. And the damage is done. The fight started. It's you letting 2 people duke it out for 5 minutes and then saying, oh, sorry, that thing I told you that got y'all fighting. It doesn't change that one of them's missing teeth and the other's got a broken nose. It's already done.
Yeah.
People have lost friends. People have lost loved ones and family members over arguments here. And that's not even accounting for all the measurable economic data and depression rates and everything else that came from it.
Where was that thing I was looking for?
I think it's a good lesson if people finally start thinking for themselves, is check the motive of the argument first. It doesn't mean it's wrong. It just means you have to question the data, at least to a rigorous degree. Check the motive of the point and the counterpoint. And a lot of times the answer is somewhere between, but one of them might be right. And if the motive is to basically just supply a counterpoint, that one's probably the right one, versus the one that actually has an agenda behind it. If this is the red point, okay, maybe you better question that. If this is the blue point, maybe you better question that. But if it's the independent scientist that says, I don't agree with that, well, you might want to at least give them a little bit of airtime and figure out why.
Yeah. And like you say, because in this instance, hey, look, the damage is done. You had a lot of people saying, no, we disagree with what the official policy is. Here's why. And now we're finding out, oh, well, I guess not only were those guys right, but the people who were making the policy knew that there were disagreements and knew what those disagreements were and still shut it down.
Mhm.
And I think that's a good place to end it on this. That's about all I've got.
Yeah, well, I think we're going to talk again Sunday, huh?
Yeah, unless you want to go a little bit longer here and talk some fitness stuff.
I had some thoughts about bands, didn't I?
Probably, but I had some thoughts about that actually are somewhat related to what we've been talking about here of diet and diet nutrition. One of the one of the ways where I think the fitness industry is so frustrating, but is also such a useful tool for just general principles, illustrating general principles, and kind of what we talked about with Fauci and his emails and the COVID policy. Where we fell into a trap is because it was an all or nothing idea.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a cognitive, what's called a cognitive distortion. If you think in all or nothing principles, that's a bad thing, and you need to see a therapist to help unwind that so you can see things more nuanced. So for instance, one of the things we joke about is the uh doing single leg, jump thrust squats on a stability ball, and you see stuff that dumb. And where that comes from is, oh, hey, look, here's this data that says stability training, unbalanced training is good because, well, balance in general is good, as we've talked about, physical balance. And because you're unbalanced, you're having to engage more muscles, basically, to keep you stable. So you're getting more work in. Well, that doesn't mean that everything you do has to be unbalanced,
Mm-hmm.
right? So you need not only the literal physical balance, but you need a balanced approach for total fitness and total health. And the same applies to nutrition. And I think that's the trap a lot of people fall into when it comes to trying to figure out what diet to choose. And you see this with fad diets, especially.
Here's a good example. The data suggests the end result of going completely vegan or going completely carnivore diet are the same. If you account for calories and macros and everything around that. So, and you get the proper nutrients in. So if veganism and carnivore diet end up with the same net result,
if you control for the variables, which you're supposed to do,
maybe
if you're
either
doing a study.
extreme is not the answer, because you could be somewhere in the middle and get the exact same results, probably in a healthier way.
Yep. And yet you will get these people on these fad diets. And how do you know they're on a fad diet? Because they're going to tell you.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. First thing they tell you.
Yeah, a CrossFitter, a paleo, and a vegan walk into a bar. How do you know? Because they told you.
Yeah. Well, CrossFit, vegan, born again Christian. Which one do they tell you first?
They're going to be so conflicted.
Yeah. Their Bible's organic, I guess.
And oh, that's wrong.
I'm going to hell,
right.
Ain't I?
Well,
probably
you're all coming with me.
Yeah.
To quote the great philosopher Dennis Leary. And I don't even remember what got me on this kick. I remember what it was. Is I was talking to someone about intermittent fasting, which is what we do. You got me doing it a long time ago, but it's not like we're evangelists of the thing. Okay.
No, it's a great tool for people like me who can eat big in one meal and like to eat till we're fully satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you go 6 meals a day, they got to be smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And you just feel always hungry. Whereas if I fast for 16 hours or whatever, oh yeah, I'm hungry by the end of it, but I can eat till I'm fully satiated, and that usually holds me for several
Right.
hours.
Well, and what convinced me when you were first talking to me is because you were citing the studies that you'd read on it, and one of the dangers of a diet data that you fall into if you don't look at their methods is that most diet studies are observational. It's okay, keep this journal of what you're eating, and then we're going to measure your numbers. But that tells you nothing about the mechanisms that are happening, the mechanisms that link what you're eating and how you're eating. And then there's a middle part here, which is what's happening inside your body before you get to that next part, which is the numbers. Okay. So and the studies you'd read and were citing were all showing biochemical reactions. That's what they were monitoring. That's what they were measuring. Those were the numbers they were using. Is okay. Well, these are what's happening. This is what's happening to your hormone levels, your blood sugar levels, and all this stuff. So we can show these mechanisms that are happening while you're fasting. So that's why I was convinced that it was a good tool. But
well,
then
fasting is a good example of the first rule of analyzing science should be, does this even make sense? Because the counter argument was, oh, after 4 hours, you're going to lose cognition, or your brain doesn't work, or your body starts eating itself. And, that just doesn't make sense from an evolutionary standpoint, because we would not have survived as a species if we had to eat every 2 to 3 hours. We would have gone extinct a long time ago.
Yeah, but animals graze, so you should graze.
Yeah, but we can't digest grass.
There was, I wish I could remember what it was. I think it was a PBS thing. It might have been a Nova. There was this really good multi-part series on first man, on the evolution of the Homo that led to Homo sapien, right? And one of the things they did is they went to Africa to some to some bush people who still lived and hunted in old-fashioned ways. And one of the reasons hypothesized that we're hairless is because we cool better. Hairless compared to primates, we cool better. And so the way these bush people hunt, and has probably gone back to prehistory, is they just chase an animal until it overheats and wears out. Okay, that's a method that takes hours. So not only are you not eating, but you're physically active for hours as they just alternate between brisk jogging and walking, chasing down this gazelle until it gets to a point where it's just lying under a bush panting, and they stab it.
Well, I like to use these tools. So fasting would be a horrible tool if I had, say, somebody who didn't have a big appetite. So they would need those smaller meals spread out throughout the day, because they just don't like eating a lot at once. And I've had plenty of clients like that, or someone who needs to be completely structured in a lot of ways. Sometimes those multiple meal diets work better for that person, because just their mental state is better when they have that structure, that thing to look forward to, that's set in stone, and they've got it all made into their little dishes. And I hate doing that, but some people, that's the way they work best. So it's a great tool. Fasting, though, is another tool for me, because if you've never been on a long fast, I'm talking more than 24 hours. The last one I did was 41 hours, so that was pretty good. Is at some point you actually start discovering things about yourself, and it's really great, because the 2 to 3 hour meal argument that you're going to lose cognition is exactly the opposite. Because after the point when your body is actually really hungry, not just I want to eat, but actually really hungry, you become hyper aware. So you can smell colors, man. It's awesome. And at some point you start to feel what real hunger feels like. Then you become more aware of your surroundings. Your vision is better, your hearing is better, your smell is better. Everything goes into a hyper aware state. And that's when you can say, you know what? Actually, now I need to eat. My body is telling me I need
Yes.
to eat.
Real hunger, as you say, as opposed to psychological hunger.
Yeah.
I don't
Real
need
hunger
to
is
eat. I'm
almost
hungry
actually
because I
a
want to
high.
eat.
Yeah,
Yes.
real hunger is actually almost like a high because you're becoming an ultimate hunter. You're becoming an ultimate food finder for a short period of time till your body does start to break down. And it does it before it's going to start breaking down.
Which the data shows it's like 72 hours, right? At
Yeah,
least.
about 3 days on average. If you're more
Yeah.
muscular, it's going to be further. This is one where it annoys me about the studies on muscle breakdown. Keep in mind, a lot of these are done on bodybuilders who are carrying an unnatural amount of muscle, and your body wants to reach a state of homeostasis. So it will start breaking down muscle if you're carrying too much because it's inefficient. Realistically, if you really break down what possibly the perfect human being would be from a metabolic standpoint, would be a low metabolism individual that can still create high force. So someone who could go a long time without eating or on a low calorie diet, but still perform when the time comes. If you really think of what the highly evolved human should be.
Yes, it's one of the reasons we promote muscle growth, strength growth programs, is because it is inefficient from an evolutionary biology standpoint.
But it's efficient from our natural or our current natural, which is I can walk to the fridge anytime I want.
Yes, and also as I've said, the primary goal of almost everyone when it comes to fitness can be summed up as I want to look better naked. Okay. Well, so you want your body to be less efficient because the more muscle you have, the more you're resting, the calorie rate is. Okay. So if I have more muscle, it's taking my body more energy to maintain that muscle. Uh, Meaning you have a higher metabolism, right? So that's what we mean when we talk about higher metabolism. So you're trying to get that muscle ratio up, that fat ratio down, so that you can have so that you can maintain that look.
Well, part of my fitness program is to create an inefficient environment in your body so you get better results from the work you do from a body composition standpoint, because we just have too much access to food. Again, that's where the fasting challenge comes in, because now you can get that switch, you can feel that real hunger. And after that, usually it's easier for somebody to turn down that psychological meal. Realistically, the more you study biology, behavioral science, neurobiology, all of the above, most of the problems in the world today, especially in the United States of America, where we're so privileged as no matter who you are, is the result of our disconnect from nature. We just don't realize, COVID's a great example. We don't realize that nature is trying to kill us all the time because we sleep inside in the AC with a fridge and clean running water. Nature is trying to kill you. You got to survive.
Right.
We don't feel that on a daily basis anymore. And it's actually creating psychological problems with us because we start creating internal anxiety.
And the psychology part is important when we're talking about fitness, because what the best, I mean, we can make textbook programs for you, but the best within certain parameters, as we've discussed, is the one you'll actually follow. So don't get sucked into these food fads and these diet fads. Find the one that works best for you and that you'll actually follow. That, and this is the important part, as you talked about,
addresses the basics,
the basics,
food intake and the macros.
When you control for the variables, carnivore, complete carnivore, complete vegan, you end up at the same place. And that's because
within
this is
2
what
kilograms over 12 months per the best meta-analysis ever done.
Yeah. So this is what I wanted to get you on, to make sure I'm explaining this right, because as I understand the witchcraft, basically weight is simple. It's not easy, but it's simple. It's a very basic mathematical calculation of calories in versus calories out, right? So if you're in a caloric deficit, if you're taking in less calories than you're burning, you're going to lose weight. Period. The end. There was a guy, a professor. It was in Kansas or Kansas State who demonstrated this by eating nothing but junk food.
Twinkies.
Twinkies and those, those little packs of Oreos and chips. That's all he ate. But he ate in a caloric deficit. He's a I don't remember if it was nutrition specifically, but he was a professor in some, in some realm of fitness. And so he was able to very precisely monitor his caloric needs, and he kept himself in caloric deficit, and he lost weight. Where it becomes complicated, and
he wasn't healthier in the process.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
where it becomes complicated is body composition and speed. So a lot of what these diets are selling is that you can easily and quickly achieve this body composition change, and they'll use a lot of buzzwords to get you there. So yes, where it comes to that mechanism of how your body stores fat and then unlocks that fat to use it as energy so that you have that, I want to look better naked goal. That's where it can become more complicated if you want to do it quickly. But if you're losing weight and building muscle, you're going to achieve that body composition change.
Well, where it becomes individual is we have basic numbers that work for most people on metabolic rate, basal metabolic rate, how it goes with the activity. But your metabolic rate has a lot of other variables to it that people don't think about. And some people are naturally low metabolism individuals. And so we got to find where your baseline is through experimentation. So if you are in what would be considered a caloric deficit and you're still not losing weight, well, you're probably in that group of people. And it goes back to your prenatal environment. If you were in a prenatal environment where the mother was not eating properly, not enough, in kind of a famished state, then you actually are born with a lower metabolism. That's just the way it is. And so there's argument to the individualism, but the whole genetics thing is not the argument. It's actually the environment you developed in. So keep this in mind, future mommies. Eat properly, eat enough. Don't think about being skinny while you're pregnant, because you might be ruining the next generation there.
Because you're going to be smuggling a beach ball under that shirt eventually anyway. So
yeah,
there's no such thing as skinny pregnant.
But again, the main thing is, we do have good numbers, and it's a good start. It's a good baseline. And once you start there and nothing happens, then okay, so let's try a little bit less. But also chronic dieting can lower that metabolism. So you do have to kind of have a wave method to your diet as well. So you don't want to try to diet down like 50 pounds in one go. You want to go down like 10 pounds, then maintain that for a while, let your body set to stabilize your metabolism, then another 10 pounds, then stabilize, then another 10 pounds, then stabilize. Because if you chronically diet, eventually you're going to put that deficit, your body's going to get used to and just baseline there. And if you baseline low, well, you got to eat less later to lose.
Mm-hmm. But have I got that right? Am I explaining that properly? That look, so long as you're in caloric deficit, you're going to lose weight. You're going to achieve those body composition goals, which are those aesthetic goals as well as the health goals. So just find the diet that works. Yes, there are certain diets that as tools have demonstrated an ability to help you lose stored fat more quickly, because they tinker with those mechanisms, those biochemical mechanisms that unlock and use stored fat over other energy types.
To some degree, usually it's distracting minutia.
Okay.
But if that helps you stick with it, mental tool as well. Well, I hate to cut this short, but I gotta.
Well, I think we should. I think that's all we need on the fitness anyway. The main thing about nutrition is don't, like anything, don't get sucked into black and white thinking, and don't get sucked into buzzwords.
Well, and just like we talked about politically, what's their agenda in fitness and nutrition? What are they trying to sell you?
Yep, exactly.
All right. I'll talk to you later then.
Later.
All right.